Okay, so the model's been gloss varnished, and I've added a few more of the minor parts and details to it. What I want to do next is apply a decent coat of flat varnish to the model prior to starting one or two little weathering things on it. So, as you've been aware with the other videos, I've been using lacquers throughout this build, mostly Mr. Colours and things like that, with gloss varnishes from other Japanese companies. Now, for the final, or not the final flat coat, but the initial flat coat, I should say, what I'm going to be using is Notes, which is another Japanese lacquer manufacturer, and I'm going to be using their flat varnish. This is a bottle I've had for a few years now. It's been pre-thinned. Well, I say pre-thinned, it's been thinned quite a few times. So in actual fact, it's a very, very thin mixture I've got here. And I think this is probably going to be the last use I get out of this particular bottle. But anyway, what I'm going to be using, my Iwata TR2 airbrush at quite a low pressure. What I want to do is get a good wet coat of varnish on there to give a good protection for some of the weathering to follow. So that's been thinned and well shaken. So I'm just going to fill the cup with that. I'm going to add the lid in this instance because it's quite full, and what I don't want to happen is to spill any of it on the model. Now, one of the things I'm going to move over here is my little toolmaker's vise. I'm going to open it up, and what I'm using that for is just, as you can see, probably is just somewhere to put the airbrush down when I need to do something else. So what I'm going to do is check for flow through my airbrush. I'm just going to drop the pressure back a little more because, as I said, I want a good wet coat on, so I want to do that at low pressure. So the first thing I'm going to do, as you can see here, is the prop. So I'm just going to give that a good overall coat of varnish and see how it looks. Like I said, this is a good wet coat. I know a lot of modelers like to mist coats of flat varnish on and stuff like that. I've never believed in that. I've always been one to believe in a good heavy initial coat. And we'll see how that looks in a minute. But then moving on to the rest of the model. And that's, as I said, a good liberally applied wet coat. Of flat varnish. It's a good thick, or a good heavy coat I should say. It's not that thick because it's quite heavily thinned. Now, as with all lacquers, this dries very, very quickly, but fortunately it stays wet on the surface just long enough for it to level off and give a very, very smooth finish. So we're starting to reach the nose now, where it's the last place I've really got to hold the model. So what I'm going to be doing is very shortly finding something, well, even something like this, look, even a toothpick will give me something to hold the model by while I apply varnish to the last small areas of the model. Now, what the flat coat does, it serves a couple of purposes. First, it does restore a kind of uniform flat finish to the model, which lets me gauge how the finish is looking, and it gives a good base for further weathering effects, which I will be adding in due course. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just using a just using a hairdryer here to give the model a quick blast. Now, I've used not nearly as much as I thought I would, so I'm tipping about half of what I've got left in my colour cup back into the varnish, the pot of varnish, because what I want to do now is add a good helping of Mr. Colour levelling thinner to that. So I've thinned it back about another 50% there. Back flush for a couple of seconds to make sure it's all thoroughly mixed. Pop the lid back on, and what I'm going to be doing now, as you can see, I can already more or less handle that. So what I'm going to be doing now is making sure that's coming through the brush, and then I'm applying, laying down a very, very wet coat of this. Don't worry too much if it looks as if it's going on too heavy. What you have to remember is this is about 80 or 90, well, certainly 70% of this that I'm laying down now is just thinner. So however heavy it looks like it's gone on the model, the majority of what you're seeing here will evaporate, and it does give an exceptionally smooth finish. So let's use my hairdryer again for a few seconds. Okay, now as I've said, being a lacquer, this will dry quite quickly. However, just to be certain, what's going to happen now is I'm not going to touch this again until tomorrow morning. At some point, give it a good 8 or 10 hours to dry at its own rate. And then we can look at bringing some of the final details on the model together, perhaps looking at a final flat coat, which may well be one of the Valero acrylic flat coats, because I love the way they give a really uniform, predictable finish. So there we go. There's an initial flat coat on the model. So join me again. When I continue with the weathering processes and final varnishing. So I'll see you soon.